for people who don't know as well, because not everyone knows, even though it's going quote unquote mainstream now, Warhammer, it's still quite niche. People have heard of Games Workshop and heard of the models and that, but they don't actually understand how complex the lore is and how loyal the fandom is and where it's going to go. I think we know where it's going to go in the next 5-10 years. It's going to absolutely explode. It'll be the next Game of Thrones or on those lines, I feel anyway, if I'm throwing out a prediction. And on that, yourself, I'm a very visual person as well. Like I'm an artist myself. I paint. And anytime I see someone like yourself, I have certain artists that just stick out, and you're one of them, and it's linked with something I'm very passionate about. And I actually here, I don't know if you'll be able to see it. I'm holding up Betrayer, everyone, which is one of an awesome novel. So we'll talk into that whole process. I'm fascinated by the process of how you came up with the actual design of the book. So Warhammer 40,000 started off as a tabletop war game and has evolved. I think originally inspired by punk rock. Margaret Thatcher, it was kind of a more a comedic kind of parody take on politics in the 80s, mixed with sci-fi and all this, and then it's evolved into an absolute behemoth of lore, which I think it is the most in-depth lore of all sci-fi, even more than Star Trek and Star Wars, as far as I know, because the detail, the level of detail of it. And the Horus Heresy novels, which you touched on there, they're New York Times bestsellers. I think there's 63 novels at this stage. The huge,
novels, and then there's audio CDs and all that stuff.
One of my favorite things. Yeah, I listen to the audio space, the mix between them. A lot of authors have contributed, which I think is really cool because they bring their own perspective, and it's similar to, people are experience the same thing. You say you're at a party, but everyone has a different way of telling the story, and they remember things slightly differently. So that's an interesting take as well on how that plays in the books. And sometimes fans get a bit annoyed. Oh, that's not correct, and how Space Marines should act, or the Primarch should act like this. But I think it's a cool dynamic. And the way I would look at it from because there's a lot of religious undertones in the stories as well. Obviously, there's the God Emperor of mankind. There's his sons who are the angels, and there's the fallen angels and the loyal sons of the Primarch. It's biblical in its scale, and just to kind of touch on the religious side of it. So you had maybe look at the authors like the apostles who wrote the Bible, and then you get to the era of the Renaissance, and you have artists who try to create visualize representations of those stories. And I will put you into that category of the Warhammer universe, Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci, in terms of the Sistine Chapel. What does God look like? What do the angels look like? How can people conceptualize those images in their own head? And you have nailed it, I have to say, and what you've done is fantastic. To come to those, and again, just another comparison, I wrote it down here, just how I would compare people outside of the Warhammer realm, the likes of a John Howard and Alan Lee when it came to Lord of the Rings. When Peter Jackson was making his movies, they needed, right, for 20, 30, 40 years, these guys were the recognized top artists to visualize the books, and they were brought in. And I make another prediction as well when it gets to you're probably already doing this behind the scenes, talking to the guys for Mr. Henry Cavill, Amazon, aka that you'll be in there because you are the man, I feel, one of the most recognized. Okay, there's other very prominent artists, but with the novels and the scale of it. So that's unbelievable. As I said, getting to talk to you about it is cool. So getting into the creative process, those authors, when you are coming up with a design or an art piece for a novel, how does that work? Do you read the book yourself first? Do you talk directly with the authors and say, what kind of story do you want to tell? Or is it completely independent and you just arrive, there you go, guys, what do you think? How does that process work?
Yeah, okay. Well, so fundamentally, it's kind of a bit of both. A lot of times when the cover is commissioned, the book isn't finished. Or they're on a first draft or whatever. So there's still a lot of change that can happen. but the basic beats, I think, are usually there. I mean, each book, if I'm honest, it's been a slightly different experience. So broadly speaking, what happens is I will get a brief from my editor at Black Library, which will explain, it'll be a synopsis of the book, who's on this planet, what they're doing, you know, who they're fighting, or, you know, the general mood, the tone of the piece. And then oftentimes they will have snippets, paragraph here, paragraph there, of the different descriptions of the different things they want to see. So it does come directly from the book, but I don't get to read the full manuscript. And if I'm honest, I don't think I'd have the time, because I'm a very slow reader and there have been so many books. By the time I was finished one book, I'd be on to the next, you know. So I just wouldn't have had the time to read the books. I've tried to keep up as much as possible. But so I'll get the synopsis, I'll get the description. In the early days, before it became a setting as such, it would just be that. But as the Horus Heresy as a thing, as a product expanded, then I started to get images of the models that they were referencing that were being made by Forge World, which were beautiful and in many ways helped me. I didn't have to worry about the design so much, because a lot of the earlier covers, not only was I sort of drawing the scene, I was having to refer back to the old Horus Heresy, Visions of Heresy book, I think it is, Collected Visions, those books, and cherry pick what I wanted to see and all my favourite bits, which was great, because that was a time of invention. It was almost like a big bang of ideas. The writers were throwing stuff at you. You were seeing what they're doing. You think, well, I can do this, and it was great. And then it kind of becomes a bit. It becomes a formula, which is awesome, because it means a lot of the legwork is done for me by other incredibly creative people. So I can then concentrate on the content of the cover. So there's that side of the brief. But once we get the brief, whether it's got images or text, then I just go off and do a couple of sketches. So let's take an example. Let's do the first book. Let's do the book you're talking about, Betrayer. I think as a case in point, Aaron likes to be quite involved with art stuff, which is great, because he has a very particular viewpoint which feeds into directly into what he's writing, and you know, the cover sort of reflects that. So I'll do a couple of sketches based on the text and maybe a couple of conversations I might have with the author. And all the time it's based on the design of the books. The great thing about doing the Horus Heresy books is at the beginning the design was locked in, which saved so much headache for me as an illustrator, because I knew where the important stuff should be, and I knew where I could hide stuff, or, you know, you can frame around the titles and the blurb box on the back. So you're able to work around the design, which just meant that you were able to sort of really drill down on the interesting bits, making those visible. So that helps. So I do a couple of designs, illustrations based on the template, and then I send that off to the team at Black Library, the editors, and then they get back to me with their chosen one, any revisions they want, like, well, could we have this person more prominent, or could we have this spaceship on fire, or maybe move this element. And the great thing about being digital, which is what I am now, is that those changes are so easy to make. As an illustrator, as a working illustrator, I have to be so flexible and be able to make those changes and work with an editor. You know, it's the basics of being a professional person. But the great thing is we get to do, you know, I get to draw like cool pictures. So they'll come with me with any changes. I'll do a revision, add some color. And then if there's any more revisions, they come back with those. And then once that's done, I just open up a full-size document in Photoshop and just start painting away for, how long does it take? About 2 weeks working at office hours, 9 till 5 hour break, on and off in between other projects. So it's about 2 weeks, 3 weeks with the more complicated pieces, because I think one of the reasons that they chose me to do the Horus Heresy was they wanted big battle scenes. And the idea was, I think I was chatting to my editor at the time, they thought, well, copying and pasting is easy to do in Photoshop. which it is. But if you copy and paste everything, it just looks like the same person over and over again. The real issue is like taking, if you do copy and paste, is just making everybody and everything look different, so there's no repetition. So I think that's one of the reasons. Technically, you can do it, but there's still, you have to do the legwork by hand to make it look like an interesting piece. One of my favorite artists back when I was into Warhammer in my teenage years was Kev Walker. And he used to do the big epic scenes of Titans and, you know, thousands of you know, little space marines. I would obsess over, you know, how he did those. And I saw some of the original pieces when they had an exhibition, I think, in Warhammer World a few years back. I just could not believe the detail that he drew. But then when you look at the pieces I do, I look at the earlier ones and think, how did I do that? Yeah, I must have had the patience of a saint to have sat there and painted, you know, Son of Horus number 376 in the background. It's only ever going to be that big. And invariably, sometimes might be covered by a title box or something. So there's an element of just, you know, putting the hours in, which when you're an artist or an illustrator, it's lovely because you can put your headphones on, listen to podcast, music, and you could just lose yourself. For the past, 20 years, 100 or so covers, I feel like I've lived in that space because I've been so involved, I've been so zoomed in some cases, that it feels like a tangible space where I was. Kind of, what was it in the books? What they call remembrances?
Yeah.
Where people would be there to document the moments. And it feels like, if I'm going to tie it into the lore, that was kind of my job, was to kind of document these moments. But like you say, in Warhammer 40,000, everybody's an unreliable narrator and other people can see things from other ways, which is great. If I'm going to get personal about Warhammer, that's one of the things I love about Warhammer is everybody's got their Warhammer. Everybody's coming at it from a different angle and they're all valid. That's the beauty, I think, of the setting. It's like it's a vast universe with vast perspectives. So, for example, the Adrian Smith picture of the Emperor versus Horus is an absolute classic, and I will die on the hill just to, you know, defend that that's a beautiful piece of artwork, regardless of illustration. But when it came for me to do it, I kind of thought, well, I'm not deleting what he's done. I'm kind of saying, if that was, you know, a painting by Titian, here's a painting by another artist of the same scene, you know, different angles, same content. And I think that's one of the strengths and one of the reasons why it's lasted so long is everybody's got their Warhammer.
Yeah, 100%. And a lot of people grow up with it as well. And as you grow up, your perspectives change and certain parts of the lore or the game you prefer. And as you get older, that evolves too. And that's one thing for me, going back to like, as I said, it was the first time I ever came across it was a friend of mine got the second edition with that. They said the artwork was very bright, the reds, the yellows, the greens, just drew you in, and the orcs versus the space marines. And I was like, what the hell is this? You know, and I need to learn more. So he had that box set. And again, like the art, I was always into art as a kid as well. And that would be predominantly my side, would be the modeling and the painting, the models, and trying to get it like the heavy metal painters as well, which was always a very difficult thing to do. And getting to go up to the store in Dublin, and first time going in there on a Sunday, I think one of my mates, and packed, and the Games Workshop staff so friendly and, you know, helping you, and like didn't have a clue about the game or how to play, but I wanted to get involved. And I remember the board was a Gorka Morka board, the desert terrain. And he says, "Hey mate, come over here." And he says, "Listen, you're going to play with these. These are called Elder, and they're howling banshees, and they're kind of like elves in space, and they scream and they kill orcs." So I ended up with 6 howling banshees, and first roll just blew away a squad of orcs or something like that. I was like, "Oh, this is unbelievable." And I ended up Elder were my army. That's how I picked them at the beginning, you know. And I different kind of armies now, but that kind of sucked you in. And but again, no one really in my circle, because I was big into sports as well and all that kind of stuff, and no one outside me really was into it at all. And it's still kind of like that anyway, you know. But you gravitate towards different people. So that side of it, I love. And in regards to the audiobooks, which we thought we were recording a podcast, it's audio. I love that aspect of it as well. What that brings into it too. So you're creating the visual end of it, and then you have the voice actors who bring what they sound like. So do you have much interaction with the voice actors at all?
No, no. I think there's a lot of different strands that go into making a product, and I usually am just, drawing the covers. I mean, I appreciate that, a lot of the times that might inspire, or they'll use that as reference if they're, doing the recording the audios, stuff like that. But the great thing is, it just seems to usually it just seems to work. People that usually work on these products are people that are into it, or if they're not in the beginning, they certainly are by the end of their time on it, in terms of maybe audio actors, or you see like people talking about it when they're making video games. The audio actors, I think a lot of times they're quite into it, or they're surprised by the time they've done all their work about how big of a product of a scene it is, and that's great, because like you say, we've been doing a lot of these books, and I've had emails from people all over the world about it, which is mind-blowing to me that it's that big, that people from all walks of life, from all different countries, love it. Because a lot of the times, like you say, sometimes you're kind of on your own, or maybe you've got a few friends, but it's just that tight-knit circle of people that you're fanatical about it with. And then when you realize, if you now you've got the internet, or if you go to an event, realize how vast it is, and how everybody is pulling in the same direction, whether they're working in the hobby on, making the hobby, or whether they're on, on the sort of just playing the game side.
Yeah, and yeah, it's kind of like the Freemasons or the Stonecutters from The Simpsons. That secret handshake thing, you recognize, is he one of them? When I was playing, Gloucester professional rugby player, there wasn't many in the squad into it. And we'd have the away games, and that's when I really got. I was aware of the Horus Heresy novels, and I said, right, I have to start reading them, get into them, and that's kind of when I got back into it again. So I moved to Gloucester in 2012. That's kind of when I really got back into it, and there was a load of books then at that stage, not obviously as many there is now. And I said, perfect, I'm going to buy them. I'm going to read them on the away trips on the bus, because they can be quite long, going all over the country and stuff like that. And that's how I kind of started getting through the books quickly. And one of the guys, Rupert Harden, played for England, front row, played in Gloucester, and he says, "Hey, mate, you went to Warhammer?" Yeah, I says, "I am." He says, and he was the exact same. He exact same story, rugby guy, all that. And he says, "This is unbelievable," and you start talking about it, and then as you said, you talk about the lore, you talk about the characters, the what ifs, the if buts and maybes. Magnus did nothing wrong, or did he, or all that kind of stuff, on your perspective on the Emperor. That's the side of it I love it. And like the Games Workshop here in Gloucester, like I just pop in every so often just to talk about lore, because I can't talk to anyone else.
Oh,
you know and it's brilliant, that aspect. That's why I say I was so looking forward to having a chat, just to geek out a little bit about the storylines and stuff like that. And for you, I know you don't want to pick a favorite, but like of the stories, or there's a few things, right? What's your favorite book, or inspiration for artwork, let's say, out of it?
Outside of the series.
Well, we can
out of all the books in the
books, yeah, it's like
oh my
inspiration.
god. Well, that's an interesting one. I think there's a couple of books. I mean, I respect all the things the writers have done. I love them all, like Battle Brothers in many ways.
Yeah.
I think we've been through the trenches, we've been through the mill in terms of doing this. But there's a couple of books. I think the first one, Horus Rising, just because it was the first one, it kind of, although technically it was the second one, but they switched it around. It was the one that kicked it all off for me, really, in terms of really cementing what I could achieve. I was really pushing the boundaries of what I could do at that point. And to their credit, Black Library kind of went with it. Originally, the series was supposed to be a different artist for each book, in the same way they have a different writer for each book, but they seemed to like the work I did. And I delivered it on time, which always helps.
Yeah.
They just asked me to if I wanted to do the next one and the next one. It just kind of grew from that. There was no overarching sort of plan. But so that's a personal favorite one, just for what it represents. I do have a soft spot for, is it Mark of Calth, the one with Gilliman in space?
Oh yeah, knocking off the head. Explode.
Yes, yeah. Because I think I was at an event once with all the writers, a couple of the artists, and I was chatting to Dan about it. And he was working with Dan Abnett is great. He's so inspirational, so creative, such an open thinker. Just put stuff out there, and I think it comes from his time in comics, where you collaborate as much, maybe more than you do in terms of book covers. But he was just throwing some ideas out there. The idea that in space there's no up or down, so it'd be great if the book cover would work if you have it at different angles, so somebody's always the right way up on different. And then we're like, what about if you have a space marine in space? They're called space marines, but I've very rarely, maybe apart from a couple of pictures in older rule books, seen a space marine in space. So that was the thing with that one. And then I did the cover, had great fun. And then I got my copy of the book, and it was one of the ones I read, and I got to page, 350. And literally what Dan had written was what was on the cover of the book. And it's like, I think he said after the fact that, he kind of saw the cover and like, I have to write that in as a scene, literally as a scene. And I just read it, and I think I was like nearly shaking, like with excitement that like somebody had taken something I'd done and in a way kind of validated it by inserting it directly into the narrative. So as a picture, in the story, it had a beginning moment that led up to it, and then it had a consequence after it. It blew my mind. And I felt, I was quite touched really that another creative would think to sort of incorporate it that way. So I'm really, that's another one that's a personal favorite, but I think I've worked on a couple I probably can't talk about, but there's a couple of ones certainly later on in the series that probably aren't out yet that are quite special and quite exciting to me. So there's been all these moments all the way through where I think to myself, I must have seen everything. I must have done everything. There's nothing else I can't think or imagine that I would put into a cover. But every time the authors, the editors come back with, new worlds, new ideas, and I'm like, let's rise to that challenge, see what we do, see where we go with it. Each one's as much an experience as it is, a joy, really. But yeah, sorry, I've gone around the houses, but yeah, there's so many. It's difficult to really pin down.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the question that I was asking earlier on, which came first, the chicken or the egg, in terms of that. And that is really cool to hear. As I said, the inspiration, you give the inspiration to the author, and then the author gives the inspiration to you, and then it meets that blend and mix is awesome, because it does, like, when you're reading the book, there's the scene from the cover, and it just helps with the story in my own mind as well.